Dun, dun, dun. And this is when we all look around and we're like, is it going yet? But it is.
Yes, is it going yet?
So we are 2 minutes late because we skipped all of the troubleshooting because now we're pros at this. But to catch you up on what you missed, Brian did a bunch of these. Woo!
I'll replay. I'll do a replay.
A replay, okay. And we practiced Zoom transfers from like one person to another, and we're pretty much experts now. So it was funny. I'm gonna make Brian be the host. We were talking about Megan was like, hey, let's talk about what we're gonna review really quickly and just do like a quick overview. I'm like, no. And in reality, we probably are the same as most of our viewers in the sense of if you see a complicated form, it's like a skim and a flick. And so we're going to be seeing it for the first time, going through it with you because that's the whole point of these is to be able to break them down so we all can understand. And so Brian, you should be able to share your screen. And now we'll transition into like a different realm of bloopers. Before it was like troubleshooting and we had like practiced the stuff.
Correct.
And now it's going to be into the stuff of like, we look like idiots because we have no idea what we're talking about. But Brian, you're like our save all grace. So no pressure.
Okay, can you see something? I made full screen.
Not yet. You need to click share screen.
Oh, dude, see, we troubleshooted a few things. Let's make that very clear.
And I'm going to be following along on our Facebook. So if anyone wants to join in, if you have questions along the way, I'm watching these comments and we're going to throw those questions in as soon as we get a chance to.
Yes. Oh, I see your screen. I was going to say that like stick your tongue out will help.
Yes.
More of these.
This is a major, major accomplishment.
I'm so proud of us.
Yes.
Okay, so cost of waiting. Little introduction on what that actually means. What we're looking at is whether you're looking to buy a house now or looking to buy a house in the future, what is the cost of waiting between those two time points? And does it make sense? Is it worth waiting? So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a negative thing or a positive thing. We're looking at the market as it sits right now to determine for us individually, does this make sense? And so we're using a couple of just numbers that we pulled out of the bag as far as averages. But if this is something that you're interested in, you'll notice as Brian goes through the page, all of these fields are customizable, they change, they project, and we would be more than happy to put you in the driver's seat, go through your scenario and break down those numbers for you. We also are going to be posting this to YouTube afterwards, as well as we'll have a play along. So that way, if you want to watch this video as a reference point and do it for yourself, you're more than welcome to as well. So those are things that are coming up for 2021 we're really excited about. And I think that explains kind of what it is, right, Brian? Am I missing anything?
Yeah. So a lot of people think, and it's again, like you mentioned, Tanisha, it's not the deciding factor, it's just a factor. And what I do on the lending side of real estate is I try to quantify as much as we can, because a lot of things about the house that you're looking for are more emotional. They're more subjective. In other words, I want 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, or a porch, no porch, whatever it is. And those are what you think you want or what you need or whatever. But I try to quantify as much of this as we can. And one of the things we deal with a lot, especially in today's market, is what is the cost of waiting to purchase a home. Again, it's not the decision, it's a factor in your decision. So the best way to quantify this is try to look into the future a little bit. And it's not just as simple as saying, hey, and this is the example you see on the screen there is if the cost on a let's say that house right now, in the example we're using, is a $350,000 home, townhome, condominium, whatever it is. And let's say that house is $350,000. Tanisha, what will that house cost a year from now?
More than it costs right now.
Yeah, and especially today in today's market. Well, we use kind of pretty relatively conservative guesses on what we think the overall appreciation rate is in, let's say, Salt Lake County, for example. And we're using about 4% appreciation is our kind of our benchmark. You can use whatever you'd like. You can look at certain segments, like first small condominiums, for example, seem to have gone up a lot in the last 4 or 5 months. But let's just use an overall assumption that we're going up 4% per year.
So that's
And it doesn't,
those
yeah,
numbers that someone could plug in and say, hey, I want to see these numbers, but I want to, and they've done whatever research and they've decided that like this is the percentage they want to use.
right,
You can project for that.
correct.
And so just to kind of put something that's relatable in my sense, whenever I do a CMA, which is a comparative market analysis, someone wants to know, what is my house? What is it worth right now? Right. And a lot of times I'll say, okay, the best way for us to predict the future is kind of looking in the rearview mirror of the past. Right. And so what I'll do is I'll look at homes that are under contract right now, because that gives me like a present idea. I'll look at ones that have closed in the past, and that'll give me an idea of what they closed for, what the market is. So essentially, we're doing the same thing with what that rate is, in the sense of we have past history of trends to be able to analyze and break down, okay, this is what makes sense and what we can count on for the future. Is that kind of apples to apples with how that's being calculated?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And so, but what we like to look at is it's not just, hey, if this house, for example, and the examples you see on the screen here are that $350,000 house today. So if you
Okay.
look at the property value, that first line right here, right
Okay.
there, that first line, that's just simply saying, hey, what's the house going to cost, that same house, in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years?
Got it.
That's
So if
just,
I own this house, potentially in 6 months, I could pocket $8,000 because it's worth that much more. Obviously, the translation, there's more factors, but it's worth $8,000 more in 6 months than it does today.
correct. Exactly right. And most people, when we think about, hey, what's going to happen with the market, people talk about, especially if you watch these business news channels, CNBC or something, they'll talk about appreciation and affordability. And it doesn't stop there, though. It's not just that you're paying more for the house. There's a whole bunch of other things we need to consider as well. And so, but the first thing is, what is that house going to cost? So this assumption here, we're looking at a $350,000 house today with a 5% down loan payment. So you have 5 down payment, a 5%, which is 17,500 right there.
Okay.
That's your 5%. And let's say the rates right now is about 2.75, which is kind of a normal rate right now.
Okay.
And it's a regular fixed rate loan, and you'll have, of course, your monthly mortgage insurance at the bottom of that, 105.
Okay.
So you take all those into account, and there you go. There's your transaction. And by the way, I'll close this again because it gets kind of complicated. But your total payment would be about $1,771
Okay.
out the
So
door
if
today.
I'm buying this house and I'm like, hold up, Brian, I actually can put 20% down. I can plug that in, and it's still going to affect all of the months of it.
Yes.
In this scenario, we're doing 5%, but for any scenario, we can plug that in and figure out what it would be.
Yep, 5% and whatever down payment you want to be. And so here's the idea. So that's item number one. I'll close this when it gets too weird. But the second column you see is waiting for 6 months. You say, okay, let's say we wait for 6 months. That house is $358. Then you think, well, I'm $8,180 more expensive now. Well, what does that really mean? Well, there's other things to consider in that. In 6 months from now, we are projecting that rates don't do much. So let's say the rate stays the same, right? But what does increase are a couple of things. Number one, your loan amount is going to go up because your sales price went up. Remember, you're putting that same 5% down, right?
Yeah.
In percentage. So you go from so your down payment's a little high, or your loan amount's going to be higher. Your down payment's a little bit higher.
Okay.
You go from 17,500 to 17,909, because remember, it's going off of percentages. And your monthly mortgage insurance is about the same, so about $107.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I feel like this is where a ton of my first time home buyers get caught. It'll be, we're on a budget, right? So we're looking at what the market has to offer, and we're like, you know what? I don't really like anything. I'm not finding like my house, right?
Yeah.
And so waiting for 6 months, 3 months, like that's very plausible. Like, let's wait and see. And my concern is like, okay, when I look at the 2 year and 3 year, I'm thinking you're getting priced out of the market. Like, you're not going to be able to afford what you can afford now. In Utah, like when I first got married, I could buy a single family house. If I were to get married now on that same income level, I would be like looking at condos or townhomes and like trying to like slim in there. And so if that trend keeps going, it's just going to be like, you're not going to be able to afford to buy a house in Utah, right? And so in 6 months time on affordability, let's say it's a 10 grand, because we're about 8,000. So rounding up to 10,000, does that price people out of being able to afford it? I understand that about 10,000 is about $50 a month, right, on your mortgage payment, give or take. Does
Yeah.
that like change it to where it's just like is 6 months too long, or are people usually okay? But if they're getting into the year mark, they're going to miss the boat.
It depends. Usually on this particular case, I think you're probably okay. I mean, you're talking, if you look down here, you're 1771 to 1805. It's about $34 more a month.
It's not going to
Not
break
bad.
me.
I think most people are okay. You're right. When you get up into year 2 here, it gets kind of gnarly. You're getting up into a different price range for sure. Yeah,
Okay.
it can be, and of course, as we've talked about before, we have a big time shortage right now, and so,
Well, my other question is too, and maybe this is something that we could dive into in a future one, but if it's like, okay, because in their mind, they're like, I haven't found the perfect house, right? And
Mhm.
so playing devil's advocate is if that perfect house never comes along, of if what we want to afford just doesn't exist in our price range, I'd be interested to know, like, okay, if we were to buy a house that maybe doesn't meet all of the wish list items, but at least gets us in 6 months, we've now earned 8,000. So can we hold on to that property enough to be able to make the difference in that price range through the equity in our home to be able to bump us up to that next home, maybe in a year or two from now, that does meet all of those wish list items? Is that
Yeah.
like
Yeah, no, well, you're right. That's a good point, because if we believe our assumptions are close, our appreciation, then look at from now to maybe year 2.
Mhm.
You've gone from 350 to 377 essentially, and that could be pretty significant.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
25 grand that would be going towards a house that you would be making, not having to like get a second job or get a raise or doing anything else. It would just be in owning your house. So, I
Yeah.
mean, it could potentially build on. At the same time, it's just like, if you're not finding what meets your needs, if those like checklist items are too drastic, obviously you don't want to be in a house that's not going to fit your needs whatsoever. But if it's more of like I feel like we get on this first time home and people are always like, it needs to be perfect, and they're afraid to screw up, and they think that if they get that house that it's kind of like the end all be all. But in reality, it's like your needs are going to be different 5 years from now than they are now. Your house might not need that. And it's kind of like, I'm in real estate enough to where it's kind of like switching out shoes, like it just makes sense. But to a first home buyer, like that's terrifying. And so just kind of like, I feel like looking at these numbers and finding comfort in it in the sense of, okay, if the cost of waiting for 6 months, we're good, awesome, we can do that. But if it's teetering on our price point, then maybe we find something today and see how this cost of waiting can then benefit us if we do own a property.
Right.
So I'll let you get back to it, but I was just.
And let me show you a magic year. The reason I have 3 years in here is for a couple is just kind of take it out a little bit. But one thing about when you buy and moving up, and I get this question a lot actually, is people are actually worried about, especially in a market like we're in now, which is what about capital gains taxes when you sell the house? If you buy a house for 350 and sell it for 390, that's a $40,000 profit, right?
Right.
Well, in the tax code, the IRS says, listen, if you have lived in a home is your primary residence for 2 out of the last 5 years, then you have a sizable exemption. It's about 250,000 per person. So husband and wife or whatever, it's 500,000 of capital gains. So if you live in there 2 years, then you can get out of that. You can not have to worry about any taxes.
Got it.
That's a nice thing about looking at 3 years as well.
So it's like I'm getting a Band-Aid home in the sense of I want to get a house, I'm getting my foot in the door. I need to kind of have a 2-year game plan of I'm going to need to keep this house for 2 years to avoid that. So it needs to be comfortable enough to be there for that chapter of their lives.
Yeah.
That's good to
That's
know.
usually, and 2 years is nothing, right? I mean, Tanisha, when you bought your first house, how long were you in your first house? You've been there quite a while. Well, I mean, you lived in it for at least 2 years, right?
Yeah, we lived in it for 2 years and then we rented and kind of did a number of things. I think we owned it for 5, but that's the same thing
turn this thing off. It's driving me nuts. There we go.
With the span, we had lived in the house for 2 years. So yeah, I mean, thinking it like when you said like 2 years is nothing, I'm like, wait a minute, like 2 years is a long time. But then I think about past and I'm like, no, 2 years is really not that long.
Yeah, exactly.
This situation a lot too, where a young family is starting out and maybe a couple, husband and wife, just got married. They want to buy their first home. And then they're worried that, I want to be in my forever home by the time my kids go to school.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're moving someone into their home, they have a couple of kids within a year or two, they still have plenty of time to find that home in that perfect school district that checks all the boxes in like a 2 to 3 year period.
I mean, when we bought that Spanish Fork house, it was like 6 years ago. That was, I remember we closed on the house and then I had Kaya, so our first kid. And our thing was, we know we don't want to be here forever, but by the time our kids start school, we want to be. And since then we went to Provo, we went back to Spanish Fork. And then when we found the house that we're in now, on our like goal timeline, we were 2 years early. We're like, technically we don't need to be in our dream neighborhood right now, but because we had started so early, we could have the option. And we're like, why not? Like, we had always rented our house. Like, we were always kind of like in this hustle phase. And we're just like, we've worked really hard for the past 3 years. Why don't we buy a house and live in it by ourselves and like be in this dream neighborhood that we want to be in? And so I feel like understanding that your goal to be in that dream house is important, but the sooner you start the building stones, that goal might come sooner than you intend it to. And it sure as well is not going to happen tomorrow if you haven't started at all. So kind of like finding that point to keep going.
Right. Exactly. Yep. You got it. So that's the number one thing you look at is this just the cost of the home going up. That's the easy part.
Okay.
The more complicated part is saying, well, what else are you missing out on by waiting 1 year, 2 years, 6 months, whatever it is? Well, the second thing is that's called appreciation of the property, right? Everyone knows that. The second thing is, of course, we talked about your payment is going to go up because you're simply borrowing more money. Number one. And number two, we believe interest rates are going to start going back up.
Okay, it's not. Okay, we're having technical difficulties
on our end.
On our end, it's like so blurry I can't see anything. But then when I look at the Facebook Live, it's not blurry. It just has a lag. So I think we're fine. I'll just like squint and just know I'm 30 seconds behind you.
Well, you're 30 seconds behind on the video part, right?
Yes, like I can hear you and everything's live, but for whatever reason, like my screen that I'm seeing is totally pixelated. So I can't see your graph, but when I look at it live, it's not pixelated.
Your faces come through pixelated here off and on, but I don't judge for that. I wouldn't.
Thanks.
So Brian, one situation I think we get a lot too is a lot of people say, let's say I have $10,000 right now that I want to put down on a house, but I need another year to gain up this down payment. Can we talk about a situation where sometimes waiting to have a larger down payment may not be beneficial to them?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great question because if you have maybe 10,000, like you mentioned in this case, there are zero down loans out there, minimal down payments. There's a zero down payment. In fact, there's a couple of these loans out there that we have access to. And that can be a great tool. The thing is you're right. It's hard to keep up. You look at how much you're saving, and can you keep up?
Right.
You save enough to outpace the appreciation of real estate and interest rates going up.
That's what we want to look at in that situation is say, can you put away enough fast enough to keep up with the appreciation of these homes?
And I run through these analyses with clients all the time, and the answer is mostly not. They can't keep up because you figure you got to save enough. Remember, you'd have to put extra down payment to keep your payment. Let's say your goal payment is somewhere around $1,800 a month or $1,850 or something. You got to really you'd have to make up like year 3. Let's say you can save $4,000 or $5,000 per year. You can put that away. That's a lot. It's a lot of money.
I don't know.
But let's say you can save $5,000 per year. That's about where you need to be on this, just kind of rough numbers, to get your payment down back to keep it down around 1,800, because you'd have to put a lot more down to compensate for the higher interest rates and the higher sales price and that higher loan amount.
Well, I think that also hinges off of, we have a good number of people who are like, I will not pay PMI. Like, that's a flush. I'm wasting my money. I'm not getting it at all. But on the flip side, it's like, okay, if you were to put what you have down now and plan on paying PMI for 1 year, maybe 2 years, and then we refinance, get the extra equity in your home and get rid of the PMI, if that was $100 payment, we're at what, $12,400 that they would have wasted towards their PMI. but in 2 years, their house is now worth how much more? Like 16,000. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's 14, 15 grand that they now have the opportunity to advance themselves. Yes, they had to pay PMI, but in the large perspective, that only comes off of money that they're making, right?
Correct. Yeah. In fact, if not only can you refinance potentially, and because in the future you may not want to, right? Because if rates are higher, but if you I swear these text messages drive me nuts. How do you turn it off? Why does Apple take over my life, Tunisia? But no, but if
On do not disturb.
I don't
Slide
know.
up your phone, hit the little moon guy.
But I'm on my computer. Is that the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay, noon guy.
Hit
Do
the
not
moon
disturb right there.
I'll
Welcome
do
to
one of
Teaching
these.
Brian Technology.
guy.
Hey, I've got to mention I'm an expert.
Like, are you 50 and older and find things frustrating? You are a Brian. We'll help you.
I'm not exactly back to the covered wagon. That's really hot on your back. The ride, a little rough.
Okay.
But no, but I was gonna say the second, as far as getting rid of your mortgage, your PMI, your mortgage insurance, the other way is you don't have to necessarily refinance. You can actually dispute it, and with the loan servicer, whoever you're making payments to. And this generally, you need to have the house usually about a year or two, depending on how fast the appreciation or if you paid extra and paid it down, is you can actually contest it. So you can contact your loan servicer right now and say, hey, my house, I think I'm at a 20% equity position, meaning my loan balance right now, I believe, is no more than 80% of the current value, right? And then you can you can go through a process and they'll appraise the house or get some kind of a market analysis on it. And sometimes you can get it removed that way. That costs you a couple $100.
We talked about that in our last video too. So I think that's a really good point to bring up. And thank you, Jacob, for clarifying that the picture is good. So problem solved.
Okay, very good. Maybe Jacob can fix my stupid phone. Well, anyway, we'll talk later. Okay. Anyway, so we're on the payments, right? We know the payments go up over time. The other thing, which is what very few people consider, is lost amortization. Now, what does that mean? That means let's say, for example, let's go to the 6-month example, right? So you decided to wait, and you've heard the old adage that if you're either paying your own mortgage or you're paying somebody else's if you're renting. So in that 6-month period, not only here's the payment. Remember, the payment went up $34, which is about $400 a year. You see where you went up for the 6 month wait.
Mm-hmm.
The loss in appreciation is $8,100. We've discussed that, right? But amortization lost is, remember, for those first 6 months of your loan, you've been making principal and interest payments. Mm-hmm. So some of your payment is going toward principal and reducing what you owe every month, and that's $3,593. So the cost of waiting overall, just looking at the value of the home, your house that would have gone up had you owned it, and the amortization, meaning the principal you would have paid down on your loan, totals $11,773. You with me?
Yes.
So that's the best way I know to quantify what the cost of waiting is most likely going to be. And then here's kind of a graphical version of that. So if you wait 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and then 3 years.
Got it.
Okay. So someone can they come to us and say, hey, this is what my game plan is. We throw it all in here and say, yes, in this time frame, this is what's going to set you up for the best success.
Correct. Yep. That's how we do it.
Awesome. That's awesome. I feel like a lot of people will come to me and they're like, I want to buy a house sometime in the future. And they have a basic understanding of like what they think they know, in the sense of, I know I need to have 20% down. Or like, no, you don't need to do that. Or I know that I need to be able to qualify and have this type of credit score, right? Because there's all these things like subliminal messages. Is that what I'm trying to say?
Just things that we've heard.
Just like online, where it's like, if I go to a mortgage calculator, it defaults to 20%, or just all these kind of behind the scene messages that we gain our education from, which a lot of times aren't true. Or like you had mentioned, there's programs where you have 0% down, there's grants, different things like that. So if their goal is to buy a house, we can realistically project what things are going to look like, where they're at right now, if it makes sense to pull the trigger right now, if in 6 months we go for broke and we can't do it anymore, or if we're okay to wait. And really, again, this isn't a case for us to try to convince you like you need to do this now. Like, we don't have any alternative motives. It's just, what does your circumstance look like? Let's plug it in and see what the numbers come back at, and then make an educated decision. And Brian, like you said at the beginning, this is just one factor. So we can do this in multiple different areas to be able to pinpoint, okay, for my exact situation, for what my goals are for me as an individual, this is my game plan. So it's not so much of this idea of like, oh, I'd like to buy at some point, but they'll now know, okay, I've got 6 months to get my credit score here, to apply for this program, to get zeroed down, and I don't get priced out, and I'm in this scenario. And they know exactly, okay, with that, I'm going to pay this, this, and this off. We pinpoint it exactly. Or I'm going to buy this house. I'm going to put 5% down because that's all I have. It meets my needs. We're going to live in it for 2 years. Then we're going to contest, or maybe next year I'll keep in touch with Tunisia on CMAs. We'll contest, get that PMI pulled off, do a cash out refi. Like, there's so many different options. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is we have the tools to be able to actually put together a ABCD plan that you can actually know exactly how, what, when, where, and how to get to where you're wanting to be.
Yep, that's how you do it.
And this is not a blanket thing. Like, you get a different scenario every minute of every day, right? Everyone has their own different hurdles that they need to jump over, and you can plan around all of those.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, everyone's different. I've never done the same analysis twice. So yeah, they're very, very customized, different. You have different goals, different objectives, and the numbers are different, income's different, savings different. It's all different. Yeah.
So we've talked about a couple of really good scenarios here. Young couple moving into a new house, someone that's just buying a first-time home. We haven't really talked about if you already own your home and you're looking to sell and buy a new one. Is this kind of come into play in that scenario too?
Yeah, it does, for sure. In fact, if you're moving, let's say you're selling that $360,000 home and you're moving up to, I don't know, what's 500,000, 450, whatever it is. The numbers are the same idea, but they're just bigger.
Right.
So the numbers are much larger. And we're seeing a lot of buyers right now have a lot of money in their homes right now, a ton of equity. So when they sell the house, they're going to have a lot of money available. So this is even more important for those people, probably. Yeah.
Definitely. I know we have a couple of clients who recognize that equity, and this is kind of like a side tangent and it's very specific to Utah. And they're like, hey, I want to cash out and I'll just like get a different house. And I'm like, no, you won't just get a different house. Like, this market is insane. It's like, we need to be able to find the house and make sure, like, selling's easy. I can sell your house within 48 hours, multiple, that part is easy, but getting into one is difficult. And so I think it's also important to know, outside of what the numbers are, to have someone that you trust who knows the industry, because this can be screaming, man, I've got equity, I should sell my house. And you can sell your house and be stuck in a rental for the next whatever and be in that priced out range and not be able to buy a house. And so knowing also kind of like the potential pitfalls of like, okay, I need to make sure I'm covered here before I take this step is always important. And I also want to point out, and like pop quiz to Brian and Megan, does it cost anybody, if someone's interested, how much is this going to cost them to come to us and figure this out for themselves?
Great question. It's zero.
Double.
It's a double zero. All you have to do is talk to me. That's the only drawback, but no, it's good.
He's kind of awful, but you're over the hump. No, because I had a client the other day who was like hesitant about getting pre-qualified, and one of the questions was like, how much is it going to cost me to get pre-qualified? And so I think that's another education factor too, of like, to get pre-qualified, to figure out these plans, like, there are not costs up front, there are not fees. Yes, when you buy a house, there is a dollar value affixed to that, right? But to figure out, to do a game plan, to like put those pieces together, we have a really big push with Brick by Brick Real Estate right now, especially going into 2021, of doing agency agreements for a full calendar year. So we honestly could care less if you're looking to buy, sell, whatever right now in this moment. We want to commit to the next year to figure out where you're at, where we're going to be. Yes, at some point there will be transactions that will happen, which is obviously the real estate portion. But above that, we're brick by brick figuring out what your game plan is. We want to start talking to you, and with our agreement to be able to have that in place, it's for the full year, and we'll continue to renew those each year, and those do not cost anything, and that gives you free gateway access to Brian, to our tools, to our planning, and all of that. So we're excited to work with you. Anything else? Did we miss anything?
I think we covered it all, didn't we? I've got a couple more graphs, but it's the same thing. Nothing's as good as that graph, though.
Let me see them. Let me see them.
Okay, here we go.
Dun, dun, dun. So explain the rainbow.
The rainbow is it's the same numbers before. So if you wait 6 months, here's the more cash out of pocket required.
Okay.
So you wait a couple of years, you need another $1,300 for that's just money out of pocket for the same percentage down payment.
That's different.
Then if your loss in cash flow, which is not your total cost, it's the cost every month, every year, what it's going to cost you. And of course, on the 6 months, you see here it's $34, and it goes up the longer you wait.
Got it.
And a lot of that's because of interest rates, because interest rates are crazy low.
And that won't last forever.
It can't last forever.
But for the next 6 months or so, we're pretty safe.
That's our best guess.
That's
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. And what's nice about this is in 4 months, we'll be doing another one of these. And so we'll be right like 2 months before what could be a potential tipping period, or hey, it's going to keep lasting. So I would just say join us next month. We're going
to be doing some forecasting.
2021. So we'll forecast into what that's going to look like, what we're thinking things are going, and then we'll kind of cycle through the same ones, topics that we are. So in 4 months from there, we'll be hitting this topic again. So check out our calendar. We'll be posting when all of those are. Our Facebook has groups that you can join, so you can join us live. If you don't join us live, they're on YouTube. So we've got you covered one way or another, and thanks for joining us.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Watch this.
I'm waiting.
For anyone that's ever watched these before, this last like 30 seconds of a video is probably the best part.
Yes, priceless.
I think I changed hosts.
You did it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We will say goodbye for everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next month for forecasting. And thanks again, Brian. All right. Bye.